Bienvenidas a todas y todas en segunda sesión de Jornada Internacional.
Hello and welcome again to this edition, the 13th edition of this international meeting against female genital mutilation. Welcome all of you that are here on site and all of you that are following this meeting online. I come from Uganda. I am Helena. I work as intercultural mediation in the prevention and assistance in cases of female genital mutilation, as well as sexual and reproductive rights and gender-based violence. I'm going to introduce my speakers. Again, my name is Hellen Namuli, and we're going to be talking about the innovating care to transform reality. We have with us 4 professionals, including Ángeles Rodríguez Benito, coordinator of the Area of Cultures, Genders and Sexualities of UNAF. Welcome, Ángeles. And Elie Mushengezi, who is the coordinator of the socio-legal area of the Merced Migrations Foundation. We also have Inma, Martínez, and Ignacio López Martín. They are the founders of the InSEx Sexological Initiative and Social Action. So all of you feel welcome here, please. And we've been listening to this morning to a lot of information. Let's continue now in this next session. And before leaving the floor to the speakers, I wanted to first invite the first speaker to continue. I would like to share one of my thoughts, because the space that we have here in UNAF is shared so that we can talk about the experiences that we all women have, the need to protect girls, and a lot of women are now more and more worried about girls and young women and survivors, because sometimes we don't know how to explain to them or to treat them, and how can we regain the trust between women and girls, so that girls should not lose hope. And as I was saying, I'm going to welcome Ángeles Rodríguez Benito. She's working with girl survivors of female genital mutilation.
Bueno, pues arrancamos con la mesa. Como ha dicho Helen, un poco.
As Helen mentioned, we've been talking about this topic.
Sabéis un poco cómo trabajamos desde UNAF. Trabajamos en red con muchas entidades, con muchos recursos.
We have several topics. We have an interdisciplinary team. We work with women, with girls. We share spaces with them, with their families, with their daughters, but also with their sons. And we're trying to build by using everything we learn, everything we know, everything we identify, trying to offer a response. And this is something that is not new per se. We've seen it, and we share this idea, this challenge, this need. And we need to talk about it, which is how to offer assistance to girl and young women. What is happening with the help that we are offering, the care that we're offering to these young women? First of all, we have prevention, but we also have care and assistance. When we're talking about prevention, what is going on? And I have to summarize a lot, because a lot of this has already been mentioned. When a girl is born in Spain, the protocol is applied. It's applied in a certain way. It would be interesting to have a conversation about how that protocol is applied, whether it's a comprehensive protocol or not. We've talked about this before. But we apply the protocol. The preventive follow-up for girls and young women, there's very little of that. Very, very little of that. The care to women and children, female girls, well, not as much as we know. There is something, you've mentioned it, the entities that we are specialized in helping survivors of FGM. We work with that. We know the reality and we're trying to offer that service. But do we have the framework that we should have with offering these services in an accessible fashion and free of charge? Well, we don't have that. And when we assess all of these, we need to understand that the whole of the responsibility, as Miriam mentioned here, it has a lot to do with girls. Everything that we do, everything we promote from the entities is our responsibility, but we are specialized entities, while there are other entities that are working with migrants or working with vulnerable families or with children that have not added this perspective, this point of view of violence, not only female genital mutilation, but every kind of violence. And so it's just the specialized entities, some of us lacking the adequate resources to actually fulfill a responsibility. We are talking about not only resources in terms of money, but also the recognition from the public and social civil society. What we're trying to explain is that we need to be able to be part of all these claims and requests. The girls and young women survivors of FGM in Spain, yes, some of them came here through the family reunification scheme. Some of them came here for other reasons. They came here, they are residents in Spain, they live here, they are girls or young women. And what is going on with them? In many cases, these girls, these young women, do not know, do not understand what the female genital mutilation is or represents. They are not 100% if they are survivors. If they have suffered it, sometimes their mothers do not know about that as well. Because if you know more about this, you will probably know that in this specific case, practices, how it is supported, how this happens. But sometimes women do not have enough information or are not fully aware of what is going on. And there's also the fact that they do not have the possibility or the capacity to let their demands be heard, because the administrative situation blocks and limits the access to information, to resources, to care services. And in line with these administrative barriers, there's also the barriers to have access to the healthcare system. I don't know, because we don't have the exact data, but very few girls, very few young women get to the doctors, because when they're healthy, they should go every year to the physician, but they don't trust the public resources, they don't trust the national healthcare system. So sometimes you don't know what would happen, specifically if you ask questions like that. And sometimes they do go to the doctor, sometimes the doctors do not do a full-on assessment, body assessment, sometimes they don't ask the right questions, or maybe they identify the issue, but that's it. There's nothing that happens afterwards. They don't identify the problems, they don't offer resources, they don't take notes that will help that girl or that young woman throughout their life based on their own healthcare journey. So that's another big challenge in terms of the care provided. This care that should be provided should be comprehensive, full on. Like when we're talking with adult women that have survived this procedure, what have we understood in these comprehensive healthcare options? Well, we need to identify the needs. We need to make an initial effort to identify what has happened. We need to pay attention to the potential other types of violence that might be coexisting with this FGM. And so we need to face it based on the life of these girls, whether it's sexual violence, whether it's forced marriage, whether it's racism, structural violence, etc. We need to help them in the development, adapted to the needs they might have throughout the different life stages. It will not be the same when they are 5 years old, 7, 13, or 17 years of age. So we need to offer a service that will be adapted to the different life stages based on the sex education, psychology, physical well-being, all these different aspects, because female genital mutilation has to be understood from all the different perspectives, because it has a way of affecting everything. So we need social resources. We need to ask, are you working with this family? Are they part of your services? Because we have identified that this girl has some behavioral problems. She has some mood issues. She doesn't understand the rules. Sometimes it's a problem of racism because she doesn't understand culture. And we haven't usually identified where someone has stopped and thought, okay, maybe this is a consequence, and should be aware of the fact that this girl has survived a female genital mutilation and a migration. She's suffering a migration mourning period. She has to adapt as a physical and psychological being in a new country, in a new culture. So we always assume that it is one thing. But by doing that, we are ignoring the other factors that could play a part. And as mothers and as girls, we need to take into consideration all of these. This would have to have a psychological, physical, sexual approach, thinking about the pedagogic, psychophysical well-being and educational procedures required for that person. And we've seen this because that allows us to actually offer a comprehensive package of measures that will empower that girl, that will help her to move forward in those life stages. We might need to refer her to other professionals, and we need to be specialized and to work based on what we know, because everyone that is working, notwithstanding their specialization, we have a responsibility to make an effort to offer everything we know to improve the assistance to the survivors of female genital mutilation. I know this. I can do this. How that knowledge can help to face the general consequences of the FGM in childhood and cases of young adults. So all of these are different approaches that have to be taken into consideration because, as has been mentioned, these have to do with human rights, these have to do with sexual and reproductive rights, this has to do with gender, intercultural, and violences, and there's also a need for an approach per person and per community. And this is an intervention that will also has to do with the family. It has been mentioned throughout the different roundtables. We have to talk about the intergenerational trauma and the different approaches, as well as to work with the families. We need to do that with the objective of ignoring a tendency to think about what can be done and cannot be done. No, you cannot tell the mother, you cannot do this to your daughter. Well, that's not enough. We need to work with the families. And these are the needs that we have identified and we have shared here, trying to create a common discussion between different entities, between different professionals, because sexual education, Nacho and Inma are going to talk a little bit more about that, psychological support, that is so tricky, so difficult to have access to, it's so complicated in general. It's one of the main battles that we still have to fight, but also supporting families, because the families should be supported in the sense that we should offer them the required means and resources to face the different situations they will be finding. Like, for example, how a family will face a situation of a female genital mutilation, how the relationship between mother and daughter will be after that, what can we do, how can we understand what has happened in that family, in order to establish healthy relationships inside that family. What happens when one sister has suffered the FGM but the other one has been prevented from going through the same process? What happens between the sisters and the brothers, the conversations and the resources that these needs? And for that, we need to create these violence-free, equal relationships, working with the men in the family, working with the families as a total, to identify the different violences, to work in prevention and eradication of all types of violence that happen in those family relationships. It's important also to support families to create a better relationship between parents and children, and to help and prevent those situations where families might have to face new elements, because there's different generations involved, because there's a whole migration process, the grief of that process, and the transnational families. How can you manage those relationships when you have a part of your family here and a part of your family on the country of origin, and the different generations in that family as well, how that has an impact on the in the everyday life, but in everything in general. What do we do from UNAF? What we do, or we try to do, is to try to take this quite seriously. We've been working on this for years now. This is not the first time that we're telling you that we're doing this, because what are we doing? We're trying to work with European entities from these different perspectives, trying to understand, to have good practices, to change those things that have been working in some areas and not others. We're trying to create work groups with people from different areas of professions that will help us, giving us their points of view, and we want entities and professionals that might be interested in knowing more about this topic to join us, to be part of UNAF, trying to rethink this all over. We also want OBG that might help us. We haven't identified pediatric gynecologist. These kind of doctors do exist in other countries in Europe, but we haven't found them here because we want to work together to understand what can we do. We want the world of pediatrics to help us. We need the resources for children to assess, to understand that the gender-based violence in the case of girls should also be considered, and including that from that point of view, the FGM, and there's also the need of finding options to have some positive relationships, to have some elements where girls and boys can play and have fun, but improve these elements of violence, of structural racism, to be able to talk about all these topics from a place of trust and a safe place. We're working in schools, at healthcare centers, and we have a specific effort in schools, primary schools, where we have seen that this is a great space to help in terms of prevention and care, and we are trying to face the demands, the claims, the calls that we receive. Entities and professionals here working every day, we face this reality constantly. Phone calls that ask us what to do, what should I do now with these, and what we try to do is to offer an adequate response to these situations, working with the rest of the entities in our network, trying to offer an adequate response, much more articulate one, if you like, easier to implement, trying to explain what the resources are, what are the different professionals that we have that can offer services to these young women or girls, And one thing that we're doing, one of the main challenges that we would like to share with all of you, is a reality that I do believe that is a bit sensitive, but or respect-inducing, if you like. But it's there, it's out there, and it's been out there for a while. And for that reason, we want you all to join us in this challenge and to be play an important part in the life and the care of the survivors of the FGM.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Many migrant women in this country in Spain have a lot of problems because they don't know when, where, and what office to go when organizing things with their documents, or to know what to do. It is an honor to have an asylum right for gender issues, and I want to welcome you as well. Thank you. I want to thank UNAF for inviting us to the organization, and I want to congratulate the UNAF for their commitment of eradicating female genital mutilation. And this is a commitment of everybody. We, as a foundation, we have into account a couple of commitments, just for you to have an idea. We have to avoid and prevent girls from suffering or experiencing this mutilation. And we have some administrative work towards family reunification and asylum seeking. And this morning you mentioned some difficulties with regards to family reunification, and this affects me because I had my own family reunification in the past, and we have helped a lot of people with their own reunification processes. We have people living with us and coming to our association, coming from countries where female genital mutilation is a reality. These young people will have in the future to ask for their own family reunification. And this morning, I think it was very interesting to talk about many of the things that we mentioned. It is true that we have to provide solutions and information to young men about these type of violence against the rights of women, but we have to insist a little bit more when they come to us, when these young men come to us, when they want to process their own family reunification, and maybe we have to refer them to mediation or social work to understand exactly so that they can understand what happens when their partners come here to Spain, because they have to know that women have to learn Spanish, work, go to school to learn many things. In my case, in my personal case, though, I am not like a coordinator of the social area, but I am part of the foundation, and I think that I am really affected also by this topic. When I had my own reunification process, when my wife came to Spain, my daughter came to Spain, when they arrived here, they started to study here. And it is true that they were trained, they had some education in Cameroon. I'm from Rwanda. They were trained in Cameroon, but the two of them had to study the secondary education here, and they study and work at the same time. Because you have to see that the economy as it is in Spain is very complicated. Only one person cannot work and maintain their families to work well. And even from a selfish point of view, and I want you to really understand me, both my brothers, my men, and I have only just one boy here, we have to understand that the fact that our women, that our sisters and daughters work is also a financial advantage for us, and it is also a positive thing for our coexistence of the fact of living together, because if they go out and learn other people from other things from other people, it's also beneficial for everybody. Of course, we will have coexistence problems or problems in our houses, as everybody coming from different places, we will have deep problems, but we can prevent a lot of problems if women go out of the house. And this is something that we as men have to take into account. During the 90s, I was studying in Salamanca, and a professor showed some pictures made by a journalist, a woman in Africa, about female genital mutilation. And I remember that my colleagues were looking at me asking, what is going on there? And I had to explain them that I come from Rwanda. In Rwanda, we don't have this practice, we don't have this tradition of violence or mutilating women, but I had to learn to understand what this mutilation is about and how to prevent it. Well, as I was saying, in the foundation, we try to process family reunification processes, and if someone comes to our service saying that they have a family in Africa, or girls who are minor who may suffer female mutilation, we try to make everything possible to facilitate or to make the process of family reunification easier, which is not easy. We cannot say that this is easy. I think that consulates are not really aware of the ministries, even though you have the approval for your or the resolution for your family reunification, then the consulate puts many problems or says that it is a very difficult process. So we can put people at risk, and I think that we have to be very, very sensitive. The civil servants of the consulate or the embassy have to be more sensitive, and I don't really understand why they don't. I mean, they are not really affected by this problem. Maybe they feel like Africans. So, sometimes we were so sexual, and for us it's also something good. But we try to facilitate or make the process of residency permit easier. Maybe we have more women who have suffered this type of violence in their countries, and there was a case in our association with an interpreter. An interpreter told us that there was someone in need, and a colleague of mine worked with a group of social workers, and in the first interview, the person affected didn't show or manifested that she suffered this type of violence. She only mentioned forced marriage. But when we continue with the interviews, we discovered that this person was a victim of mutilation. In this case, the case changed because a psychologist was involved, social workers were involved, even the management was involved, because this specific person was living in a place which was not very adequate. And we established an emergency situation to protect her. The lawyer contacted ACNUR, and they UNHCR, sorry, ACNUR is the Spanish acronym, so that this person could be supported. But this was a very special case, you know, and we contacted the UNHCR, the refugee office in the United Nations. We got an appointment. I contacted the Red Cross as well, because you know that in the refugee shelter system in Spain, you need evaluation, the assessment of the Red Cross, and it takes a lot of time. So I contacted them to try to speed up things. Other entities offered a place for this woman to live, but we obtained, a place. Thanks to our foundation, and this specific woman is living in a very adequate place. But the truth is that we were working from many different places. We provided Spanish classes, training, and many other things in a period of 1 year. The truth is that this woman is working, is integrated in the society, and now we are seeing what her needs are in her origin country. This is a comprehensive assistance process, and I want to make this clear. We believe that we need to reinforce good practices in the future, especially the principle of no devolution, of no
las personas que están llegando a Canarias, que
with people coming from the Canary Island, some people coming are leaving, and they have just a month, and in a month we cannot do anything, and they have no return, a return order, refoulement, sorry. So when the police identifies them, they have to identify women who were victims of female genital mutilation so that they cannot be returned, and they have a direct channel so that we can work with these people so that they can be part of our country. Sometimes we defend women's rights, Spain defends women's rights, we fight against gender violence, but we have to take these non-refoulement principle into account, because if they are returned to their origin countries, they will have a lot of problems. Another thing that we have to take into account, the idea of not having a re-victimization process, and I think that we have to commit ourselves to keep people safe. If there is just one explanation of the situation, it will be okay. I think that all stakeholders will have one report, and the police will have to trust them, because if they repeat the same story again and again, they will be victims forever. So if there is just one professional person writing a report, it will be okay. Then we will have to take this specific report into account and not ask the same questions again and again. And this was my case when I came to Spain. I didn't want to explain my story all the time. It was like a torture to explain what happened to me or what is happening in my country or my experience in my country, because we had a genocide in Rwanda. We believe in my association that a report, just a single report, is enough, and I think it is a question of confidence that the police has to trust the agents, the officers that are part of the processes, the psychologists, etc. And if we are wrong, and if we protect someone who has not suffered any violence, it's great. I mean, it will be a good thing to facilitate integration, at least is what we think. Another principle that we think is important is networking, as the UNAF said before. And it's good to say that we work with them. I'm a colleague who's a lawyer and another lawyer who is part of the office worked with UNAF. This year she's not working with us anymore, but we are collaborating with UNAF, and I think that this is a work that needs to continue to be part of the future. In fact, yesterday I received a call from a town council, not from Madrid, another municipality that I don't remember now, and they said that they had someone coming from Africa with a 13-year-old girl. This woman was left without a house, without housing, and the town council asked for support. During the conversation, I discovered that this woman had suffered mutilation in her origin country. Since it was yesterday, I didn't have the possibility to answer them, but I know that UNAF, Maria Ángeles, is going to help her and to see the best that we can. We cannot make miracles, but the truth is that we can do our best to protect people. To finish with my presentation, and I know that some later we will have the possibility to have a dialogue. As I said before, we still work with awareness campaigns as UNAF. I think that my responsibility as the coordinator of the legal and social work is to work or to have a cooperation with the UNAF so that they can provide training for us and for the people, the young men and women who work with us. As I said, in the year 1994, in an interview, I said that Spain is a welcoming country. Throughout the years that I have been living in Spain, and I have lived in several cities, I confirmed what I said at that time. Spain is a welcoming country, that's the truth. Spain is a country that defends human rights, and the only thing that we wish, or that I would wish after 30 years observing how things take place in Spain, is that Spain as a country doesn't lose or miss these characteristics of being welcoming and not judgmental, or a country that offers opportunities for living here. And I think that here we have migrants with me, you know, that we come here to have a better life, to collaborate, and if Spain is doing okay, we will do okay as well. We are not here to steal or do bad things. Stealing and causing damage to people is something that it is easier to do in Africa. We are not here to commit crimes, we are just here to have a better life, and if Spain is a good country, we are going to have more possibilities. And I want to congratulate, I want to finish by congratulating and congratulate everybody who have organized this event, and calling the attention of my brothers in Africa, because there is something that we have to do. I know that there are associations of men trying to do things better, but we are a little bit slow, and we need to try to push up and speed up so that our sisters can follow through and claim what they need and what we can provide in our houses. You know, allowing women to be trained and work is very basic, and we have to do it. I want to thank again the entities that collaborate with us, that support us, and I include myself in this immigrant person who was supported by different entities at that time. Once migrants receive support, as some of the colleagues here, we also want to share our experience and the support that we have received, so that those who come can be supported and can receive aid and help. We have an external aid system, and we support people wanting to have information about asylum, humanitarian aid, anything that they want to solve. They can come to the association, and we can support them. Sometimes, I mean, we don't get what we want, but at least we try.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Nuestra cultura es muy difícil.
Thank you. In our culture, it's difficult to explain how body works. How can we take care of our own health? How can we understand our own rights? And for that, we have with us two speakers, Ignacio López Martín and Inma Martínez Cerrillo, who are going to explain the key role that sex education plays in gender-based violences. Thank you. We have a presentation, if it can be shown. Otherwise, we can start without it. So we are InSEx. We are a sex education cooperative that has as an objective the idea of combining our experience and social intervention with groups of population that have already undergone certain situations. And in the last few years, we've been working also with a lot of women migrants that have suffered discriminations, exclusion, and other violence. So when we started to get trained and prepared to do this, we understood that our point of view, what we want to share here today, was something that the third sector entity was lacking, especially for those who were working with this kind of people. So the cooperative, what we do is we offer these sexual education workshops from primary school, high school, universities, but also with families. Just as Maria Ángeles was saying, we're trying to train professionals, NGOs, trying to connect all the dots, adding the sex education perspective, and also by offering consultative services and advice. Before we start our own presentation, we need to explain what is this that we call sex. And by that, we're going to quote one of the first sex experts that considered the multicultural aspect. Hellen Namuli in 1895 said that sex is the key element of life, is the root of life. This idea of sex that Hellen Namuli explained didn't have to do with practices or our genitals. It has to do with who we are. So for us, sex is an element that makes us the people that we are, the men and women that we are, and will continue to be, because it's something that we build upon throughout our whole lives. Sometimes some biographical elements or sexually relevant elements change the way in which we see ourselves as men or women. Like, for example, an experience like the female genital mutilation or a migration can change us as a person. When we think that's who we are based on our sex, we have an identity, how we are in terms of being a man or a woman, the erotic perspective that have to do with what we search, what we want, and what we experience. But also, there's the fact of coexistence, because we coexist as well as sexual beings. And as experts in this, we need to talk about this aspect.
Vale, buenos días. Muchas gracias a la UNAF, a todas las personas que están
thank you to
compañeras que
UNAF and to all the colleagues that have been part of these international methods, and thanks to all the interpreters, both language and sign language interpreters, for their effort. I wanted also to quote Hellen Rodríguez. She, by 1927, said that we should not consider that training is something that ends with childhood. To learn is something that never ends, because the spirit of the human can always broaden and our heart can always improve. So by 1926, she was 13. I'm 45, and I will never have anything as clear as that said and quoted in my name. But this is a great definition of sex education. And I want to thank UNAF for inviting us, because we're talking about sex education, sexual education. This is not affection, sexual education. No. Don't mention just the sex. Talk about the affections. And why it's for us important to talk about sex education? Because this affection is only used here in Spain. In the rest of the world, they talk about comprehensive sex education, sexual education, intersectional, multicultural. But the affective is something that we only add here in Spain, and we add it because we inherited from Franco. At the time of Franco wanted to have a sex ed congress, a kind of conference, and the censorship said, no. this sexual thing is not right. And they reach an agreement by saying that it could be affection, affective, sexual. Like affections are good, but sexual is something that is shameful, that you should be ashamed of, that has to be made better by connecting it with affections. But sex is not dirty, sex is not shameful, nothing wrong there. You don't need to connect it with other words because we are sexual beings. And we build upon that throughout our whole lives. And for that reason, what we're going to be talking here is not a sex ed that has to do with medicine or biology, because sex is not a disease, it's not a diagnosis. Sex is who we are. And we should not only talk about sex education as a prevention, because it's something negative. No, sex can be positive, and that's precisely one of the most positive things that we have in our lives. So, sex education has to do with the existentialism, humanism values. How do we create ourselves as sex beings throughout our lives, interconnecting everything, and interconnecting ourselves with humans. So, in sex, we're talking a lot about sex education now, and because we're sexologists, we could say, that's great, that's fantastic, that people are talking about sex education. But there are 2 points of view. On the one hand, kind of old and kind of dated point of view that says that sex education is guilty of everything. All the evils come from there. If you teach girls and boys about sex, everything will just go to the ruin. And because they're guilty of everything. And on the other hand, we have sex education as the big savior. Everything will be solved if we educate girls and boys about sex education. The world will be better. And that's not also true. I think that we are giving too much responsibility to sex education. I do agree with Fatoumata's mention before, our colleague mentioned in her speech, that education, training, is fundamental. And that's true. Just as Elie mentioned too, what is going on with the consulates? What is happening with the lack of awareness? Well, we can teach people that awareness, we can teach things, but we have to be aware as well of the world in which we live. We live in a patriarchy-led capitalism world. Sex education cannot overcome all that, but it can become a tool to improve the possibility of having a world where other worlds are possible.
Con esta idea de educación sexual.
So this idea of sex education and training, personal growth, allows us to ask the questions when, why should we have a sex education? There are 3 main areas in education. We will have formal education, which has a lot of discussion and debate. Should sexual education be included as one of the topics in the school curricula? Should it be regulated? We don't have that specific laws or act now to regulate it, at least in Spain. The potential workshops that we can do, for example, sexual and reproductive health, workshops, groups of women, groups of survivors of female genital mutilation, and there's also the informal sex ed, because we believe that that's precisely where all of us that work with both women and men can do this from that everyday life conversations, those tools, those workshops, where we can informally deal with this. And I'm thinking about those groups of women that are survivors of violence. Sometimes we're not comfortable to talk about these kind of things in a group, but if we can show how there are other ways of doing this, where we can get from other interventions that information, we can add that perspective. Something that just happens normally from an informal moment, because there's nothing wrong in that. What we are saying is that if we're always taking into consideration that sex is part of the human being, we can profit from specific moments that will allow us to approach the subject and add important ideas to the men, women that we work with. The strategies that we usually use in social interventions tend to connect well with sexology. For example, the fact that it's central to who we are as a human being. So if we put the subject, the human being, at the core of the process, and we look at them, in a positive way, trying to avoid that patronizing view, that way of looking at that person as if they were children or less than, understanding that they have their own autonomy, their own responsibility, that they can take and make their own decisions. And we work also in connection with the links and the relationships, those bonds that are established with the mediators, with the professionals, and that allow us to teach, because we have something to offer, something that is of value for these people, for these women, and they will allow us to train them, because they will give us the right to do so. And also, we can accompany them. And when you accompany someone, you are basically sharing part of the path, sharing a middle part of their lives with them. We also talk about that networking. I prefer networking more than do a referral, because when you're doing a referral, you seem like you refer that person, you avoid that problem, you ignore that, you leave them there hanging on their own. But I prefer a network, to be part of the net, to connect. And there's also this element of the informal opportunities, because this sex education is something that you cannot avoid. It's unavoidable. In all of our interventions, we will be talking about ways of being a woman, ways of being a man. How do we want to live or coexist? If we put it at the core and we don't want it to be something in the margins, that is something outside. No, it should be at the core, because it's key in making us who we are. And when you think about this, when you have everything previously planned and programmed, we can help others and help those that come to us.
Y no, la anterior, eso. Queremos
We also
rescatar también una
want
cita de
to mention
Marcos
another
Sanz,
quote from Marcos Sanz, one of our greatest masters. We learned from him, and he said in 2020 that to intervene is to pay attention and to understand. You need to understand rigorously to be able to offer an adequate attention, to assist comprehensively. So for that, you're already working with the survivors of FGM. You're working with people in general. And based on the bonds that Inma was mentioning, and to connect it all between assist and understand, pay attention and understand. And etymologically, it is always a connection between what is outside of me and to process that inside of me. So those two directions, and to understand and to assist, will change our lives, because we will see the people we have in front in a different ways, because the only way to actually pay attention to help someone with quality and humanity is by listening to what they have to tell, by listening to the life story, because that person is an expert on his or her life. And we can do that. We can do that through the different specific resources, or even without them, just by changing our point of view from going from the inside and understanding what we're listening to just helping, to going into the outside, So again,
la
there's that
inevitabilidad
unavoidability.
de realizar educación sexual, queramos o no, todas
We
lo estáis haciendo y lo estamos
are
haciendo
all
todos,
working
¿verdad?
in
Porque
sex
somos
education
heterosexuales
all the time
y de alguna
because we
manera
are
estamos
sex
planteando
individuals,
distintos modos, todos
and
únicos y
each
irrepetibles
one of
de
us
ser sexual.
is a way of
Desde ahí,
understanding
no,
sex.
como no podemos no
Each one of
intervenir,
us
sí que venimos de
has a
alguna
different
manera a
perspective.
plantearos una
So
propuesta,
if you cannot intervene,
de un modelo,
well, we have a model that we're going to propose you. This is the pleasing from Jack Cannon,
con permiso, que no repete,
and I hope he will not be angry because we just adapted it, and it's the levels of intervention that we can use in our resources. So first of all, we have understanding, to understand that we are sex-driven subjects. Sex is not just a biological thing, it's a much more complex aspect. It talks about bonding, relationship, coexistence. And from there, we need to allow the women we work with to talk about this. And sometimes, if we're not in a specialized resource, or if we do not have enough training, we don't tend to even consider this, because talking about sex scares people. Like, oh my God, let's see if someone else can do that, and it's not me. Because this topic should be dealt with. Because I am a job-seeking resource. Yeah, but maybe this woman trusts you, and because she trusts you, that relationship is so valid that you need to profit from it. Because otherwise she might be sent or referred to a specialized service. She might not tell that person nothing because she doesn't trust that service, but she's trusting you. And that's gold. That's where the gold lays. And that's precisely the goal that we need to mine. And from there, we will move to the next element, which is to pay attention. To pay attention, we'll have two elements. One is offering information. You're already doing that. Most of the entities here and the people that have already talked are sharing information, giving information from where you are, about what you know. You don't need to be a sexologist to be able to train from the point of view of the sex education. We might not be able to have all that information, but we will give as much as we have, and we will go hand in hand with that person, with the contents that I have and the contents that I trust. Because nobody is an expert on everything, and that's fine. We tend to forget that, especially the social aspect. And finally, we have the consulting or advising elements, because some people will require a more customized service, and there precisely we need someone who is fully specialized, like Inma mentioned, to go with another resources instead of just referring the patient to another person. We, as Fatumata again mentioned, if I cannot help you, I can search for a place, they will be able to help you. Just as Maria Ángel mentioned, the specialized resources that we need, and we are all working in a network. So we want to promote you to continue learning, to continue working. You are doing a great job, not always improved, but we would like to conclude with another quote by Angela Davis. And I hope she doesn't mind that we're quoting her. It says, education, also sex ed, is a tool, a powerful weapon for freedom and social transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for the things that you have shared with us. I honestly think that if everything that we have learned here can be applied in practical terms, we will be very successful. Everything that has to do with mutilation and gender-based violence. Thank you very much.
Now we have
a Q&A session, those for you who are here in the room and for the people who are connected online.
It is true that
I hope that these meeting or the conclusions of this meeting get to everybody. I work with men and around 263 people, many people, and they, since we are working with migration and sexuality in Africa, the truth is that we don't speak much about sexuality, and I understood that sexuality is something that we need to talk about. It's something that we need to discuss and not to change its name. And this is very important, but the reality is that in Africa we don't speak about sexuality much. We don't speak it at school, we don't speak about it, young people do not speak about sexuality until they are adults. And we as mothers, we try to speak about sexuality with our children, with our relatives, because this is part of our life. This is part of our life as human beings. We are not just speaking about Africa, we are speaking in general terms, because this is not the reality in Africa, or only in Africa. And I work in different associations. I work as an interpreter in the morning in an association in Spain, not just in Madrid. I know many associations in different cities, and I know the difficulties they encounter, and how this is an impact on migration. And I'm seeing changes. I know that things can be better, but still I see changes. I've been living in Spain for 20 years, and I see that the situation has changed with regards to migration, women, female genital mutilation. Although we lack a lot of information, and I hope that the information that is needed gets to everybody. As François said, we are working on that, and this is just affecting women. As Yara said about mediation, as facilitating women of intercultural mediation, the truth is that we have a lot of work. We don't do everything that we want. We need more support. We need help, and that professional people who are involved to value us, because there are some situations in mediation or in Spanish, for example, we don't understand, and I speak well of French, and sometimes there is a misunderstanding, and when we speak, we have to explain. Sometimes people tell me I am not crazy, as a psychologist say. Psychiatrics and psychology is not the same, and this is something that we have to take into account. Migration itself is a very difficult process, and if I need support, if I am suffering as a psychologist, I will go every afternoon, and people need psychologists. We need more professional people. The migration process is a very long process, very difficult one. Until we get here, it's a very difficult part of our lives, and this is something that stays in our head forever. So thank you, everybody.
Buenos días.
Good morning.
Primero voy a dar gracias.
I'd like to thank UNAF in the first place, because each year they organize these type of events related to female genital mutilation, which is, the objective, the purpose that we need to follow through every time, every day. And today I was not going to speak, but Elie mentioned something that affects me, which is the right, the fact that migrants in Spain within their families and their claims, the claims expressed by women in the table. But I didn't agree with Leah, and the truth is that you always learn new things. You said that if in Europe, Occidental, Western countries practiced female genital mutilation, to eliminate mutilation in the African countries or the Latin American countries, the truth is that in many of the countries it is forbidden by law, but they still practice it. Many countries practice it. If the populations or intellectual people in Africa or the academia, etc., they raise their hands, they work to do something else, things will change. But if they take their girls to be mutilated, knowing that this is very harmful, there is a reason why they do that. We cannot defend mutilation from a scientific point of view because it's against the health of women and against their pleasure. I know that. It has been shown. But African families and Latin American countries decide to continue performing this practice. So we need to ask ourselves why. Why the Western countries has abandoned this practice and the African countries still performing it and developing it. It's just education. Can we remove this practice thanks to education and help women? I know that for sure. But I know that it is also difficult in the African countries, at least if we take into account diaspora. Maybe diaspora and intellectual people can, do something, because we know that there are thousands of women here in the Western countries victims of mutilation. And you have the numbers here, but in the African countries, we don't have any number. But once we take into account immigration, the same form of diaspora, then we have to take into account reunification. And during this path where reunification has to be requested, maybe we can raise the awareness about what mutilation is, or maybe condition the family reunification to the fact the families do not mutilate their girls. And I know that this is also a cultural issue, and we professional people, mediators, doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, etc., we have to do something. We should know that we are in front of people coming from different countries, being victims of violence, and try to identify whether women have suffered mutilation or not. It is only when we will be able to help people and to solve the problem. When women say that fathers or men do not help them, and I have worked in a health center, gynecologists tell me that no man can do their visits, the visits of their pregnant women. And you have to tell women, please take your husband to the next visit. That's what we have to do as professional people to help women in this process. We look at this room, we're just a few men. We need more men to be involved in the process. So the work is also for men, because men are the one executing violence or decide whether their children have to be mutilated. So the fight is also a fight with the participation of men. We all have to fight together. The problem mainly is to increase education programs, because I think thanks to education we can remove mutilation so that people really understand what is going on and not be in ignorance.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning. I am a psychologist and I work in international protection matters, and I've been working in gender violence issues as well, and I just wanted to say a couple of things. You mentioned the figures or numbers of people who are obtaining asylum for gender-related reasons, and I'm not going to give you any statistics, but I want you to know that this depends on the country where they come from. In Colombia, it is very difficult to obtain the status of refugee. With people from Somalia, we are now improving, but I think that it is not just the fact of each woman or individual case, but the problem remains in the nationality or the origin countries. I just wanted you to know, because you mentioned this point, and I wanted to tell you that this depends on the countries. Another aspect that is related to what you said, we have to say that education is a challenge. And I have one question. Maybe in the programs of the study of medicine or nursing, is mutilation included? Not at all. And I have found statements and testimonies of people who went, or women who went to the doctor because they suffer many diseases as a consequence of mutilation, and suddenly at a hospital I have seen that they are looking at me as I was a monster. The doctors look at me as if I was a monster, and I thought that my body was normal, and they suddenly see the faces of professional people in Spain looking at me as a real monster. So we have to understand how we educate people who work with this type of women. You know that professional people working in the healthcare system detect these type of problems, and if they don't have any idea of their situation, maybe the social part will also fail, not to mention the psychological part of the process. So we have to understand how programs of studies are designed. These programs of studies are training professional people who are going to be in contact with women who have suffered mutilation. So let's take this into account, and I leave it here. Another aspect that is also related to this idea is that we as professional people, we need to look at ourselves and see what is our reaction, our personal reaction when we come across this problem, when we find that there is someone who has been mutilated. Because our face, our facial expression is going to tell them a lot, and it's going to make them suffer. So let's take into account our reaction, our fear, because for them this is a normal practice and this is integrated in our lives, and just to see our horror face, a different perspective, is going to be a trauma for them. So it's not just a trauma itself, and this is a psychological aspect, but also we have to take into account what happens when you tell your trauma, when you tell your story. And that was it. Thank you. Yeah, we also have online questions, people connected online. But this is the last question in the room. Dear brothers, representative of African men in the room, I want to tell you that female genital mutilation is a reality also in Spain, and we as women, they were running all over to train professional people who deal with the practice. But what happens with our male brothers? What is their role? What have they done? They have done nothing. I think that it is a very good time now for African men to represent their continent, our politicians, the big organizations, to really put this mutilation topic in their agenda so that they can speak about it and work in their offices. Not just here or in family reunification processes or the political agenda in Africa needs to include female genital mutilation from here to our origin countries, because this work that we are doing is not a political issue. And I'm thinking about my own country, Mali, where mutilation or female mutilation is not part of the political agenda. At least we can thank the European countries for their protocol. I know that the protocol is not working, but at least we have something here. But what happens in our African countries? What protocol do they have? What work are they doing to help their families to protect their rights? You men who are here in the room have to take into account that this is the work that we need as African women, so that this could be a political issue in our country's agendas. because it's good, for us.
Y el trabajo que está diciendo que es trabajo de educación sexual.
The sexual education work that you mentioned was part of the agenda in Africa. Think about the reality a long time ago. There were also men who were mutilated in the past. And then in the African countries, there was education on that for a long period of time. So it was a work related to sexuality, about the protection of families, about the role of women, etc. But this was a big problem. But it was an old issue. So men have problems when they get married, when they get on with other friends. But the sexual education work that was part of our history in the past is lost. It's not in African countries anymore. We, from your experiences as women, we know that sexual education is important. What happens is that sometimes these education programs get too late when they are about to marry or when they are about to go into a relationship, and it is too late because sexual education at that point in our lives is not necessary. And I know that you who are here is the reality. It is a reality in our country, so we need to have more spaces to educate female or to educate women. Sexual education is not part of the political agenda anymore in our country. There is nothing left. Even the fact of being a mother is not enough, because sometimes it is difficult to talk to our girls. We don't have it as part of our culture. Many of the things that were part of our agenda, they are not part of the agenda anymore. We need to recover that space. Awareness is something that we have to take into control. Our sisters have made an incredible work in terms of visualizing, raising the awareness of people, but now we have to improve the affected community needs more support, and this is something that we need to do in the future.
Bueno, tenemos también preguntas de compañeras que estas vienen desde online.
We have more questions from the online.
¿Cómo se centra y vigila la mirada multicultural en la atención
How
a
do
las
we
mujeres
include the
migrantes
multicultural point of view when we're talking about migrant and refugee women?
La respuesta sí,
Well,
no solo yo, también desde lo que han
in order to reply based on what Inma and Ignacio also mentioned, to connect the cultures, help us to see the realities, the people, the societies, is a way of understanding that reality is diverse, multicultural, and that all the different cultural contexts, family contexts, social context, economy, finance context, makes us who we are and how we live the world. Well, our point of view is shaped by all of these, and as Nacho and Inma mentioned, it's a way of understanding without judgment, without a rush to understand, but to connect it all, to work all together. I don't know if I've been able to reply to your question, but I hope you will understand as our starting point. There are more questions, online questions. There's another question for Nacho and Inma. The sex education that is proposed by the new school law will include all the different perspectives that you mentioned? That's a very complex question. Or not? Say whatever you want to say. Well, the different acts includes the need to add sex education, and they sometimes call it effective sexual, sometimes they call it gender sexual education, but it has never been defined or developed as such as a program. But will it be included by law in the schools? Well, from our point of view, that will be positive or not, because it will depend on how they do it. It will also depend on, because there's many different types of sex education, and it will always depend on whether we're working from the point of view of the community, because everyone is trying to teach based on what they understand as sex. So there will be sex educations that could be something positive, but other that might be a bit scary actually. There is not a specific law on that, but if we had one, we would have to pay attention to what the letter says. Another question for Elie. In order to end, in Spain, we should strengthen the value of cultural mediation professionally and not make it just a voluntary task. So, what are the strategies that you are proposing? Who is working in this sector to make sure that the public administration will recognize its value and offer it more resources? That's a very complex question. I've just concluded a course on cultural intermediation. I'm just learning myself and fighting for the rights. I am a social worker, but we want also to have that perspective added. One of the elements that sometimes is not valued, and it should be, especially for us that work with the people, it's the professionalization, and that's a constant fight here in Spain. Social workers want that, and psychologists want that, and lawyers want that, and it's a constant fight we should not lose. And I need you to teach me things in the coffee break, and we need to work together. We can work together, and that way we might be able to advance together. And I think that we need to move forward. And as has been mentioned, what are the African men and the African politicians doing? They might not be doing, okay, let's say it in a different way. They could do better. They could be doing more. One of the things is that when we're talking about Africa, it feels like a whole. Africa like one big thing. But there are different countries inside of Africa. Some of these countries require a political action that should take place immediately, but there's the area near the big lakes where, in my opinion, but I'm not 100% sure, because Burundi, Rwanda, Congo, and even Uganda, I think that, like they would say in Uganda, we have the practice which is the opposite of the excision of the labia minora. There they want to engorge them because that will help her to get a husband. And I have to also talk about this. I don't have enough data to talk about this, but in my opinion, that is also a type of violence on women, at least psychologically, because women are forced to endure this amount of pressure about that. But because Africa is such a huge continent, we lose the clear demands because they're saying, oh yes, that happens, but it's not in my country, somewhere else. Like with, for example, with homosexuality in Africa. Some countries in Africa have absolutely no issue with that. It's not a problem. While there are others that can sentence homosexuals to death penalty. So Tanzania Uganda, because some of these countries will not consider it relevant, but all this is a huge issue. So we need to put things into perspective, because it doesn't make sense if you don't address some big issues like having the death penalty for being homosexual, and that's as far as I want to go in that direction. Well, thank you very much. Do you want to say something else before we conclude? That's fine? Okay, well then, in that case, we're going to conclude. And in order to do so, remember you have your feedback forms, but I would like to share my own thoughts as well before we conclude. These are my thoughts. And I think that the culture helps to define who we are. And it helps us to see the world from the eyes of others. And if they are different to us, sometimes we need to decide what is good and what is bad in each culture. Thank you very much. And we're going to conclude here the online part, because now on site we have networking and a wonderful concert and a dance. Unfortunately, online you will not be able to enjoy that, but thank you again, all of you, and online participants and on-site participants. Thank you very much for being here with us and for paying attention.